Good morning, everybody. You are listening to K-Talk Radio, 1640 AM. This is the show, Utah Home Sweet Home. I am your host, Yoshi Shiraki, and today we are going to be talking about flipping houses. You know, there is some interesting opportunity right now. They say with every negative, you can typically find a positive, and I would say that in the majority of market crashes that we've had as an economy throughout history, you'll always find a story where when the economy tanked and there was a negative, there were certain individuals out there who took advantage of the opportunity and were able to make it a positive. Meaning that, especially through real estate, when the market tanks and crashes and there's blood on the street and everybody's fearful, there are other individuals out there taking the opportunity to purchase low-priced, very economical stocks or real estate. And so when the economy turns around, because it always does, it always has in history, whatever it's gone down, it's always gone back up. The people who took that negative and purchased the affordable assets at that particular time ended up making a positive out of that negative. I recently saw an interview with one of the lead acquisition gentlemen for Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. For those of you who have never read that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I highly recommend, if you have any interest in real estate, reading that book. Even if you don't have any interest in real estate, it might be what creates interest for you in real estate. I know for many people, including myself, that book was really what helped me understand the power of owning a rental property. You know, just owning real estate in general. And so, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, you know, New York best-selling author. This individual, this acquisition manager, one of his lead acquisition gentlemen, talked in an interview and had shared that they had purchased 10,000 units over the last decade, per se. So that's a lot of rental properties, 10,000. And they had as many, guesstimation, I guess you could say, a guesstimated prediction that the economy will go back down, because it always has in history. There's a pattern. Every time we've had a bull market and things are amazing and things are going up and the economy is booming, every 7 to 10 years it will make a correction, and in some cases a recession. So this acquisition manager, lead acquisition person for Robert Kiyosaki, talked about how they had purchased 10,000 doors, but over the last several years, anticipating that there's going to be some type of correction because we've gone up. For, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they say on average it's every 7 to 10 years the market will correct and start to get steady or go down to some degree. I think we're on the 12th year. Like, we're so overdue for a historical correction if you base it off of history. And these individuals, Robert Kiyosaki's team, they were selling off 3,000 of their units over the last several years, preparing for an economic correction. And the reason they did that is they sold off their 3,000 least performing assets so that they could have cash ready when we have an economical downturn. So a lot of really smart financial people out there have been planning for what they think is some type of correction in the market or maybe even a recession. And now with this pandemic that we're facing, more and more people think that this is it. This is the time. It's here. This is the very beginning phases. We've had more unemployment as a country, as a nation. We've had more people, if I'm not mistaken, apply for unemployment due to this pandemic than in the Great Depression. And so we have a lot of writing on the wall telling us people can't pay their rents, people can't pay their mortgage, people are filing for unemployment. There's, yes, loan programs that are going to be able to assist these people. There are stimulus programs that are in the making, in the work. But how well will all of that work if we have so many people who cannot pay their mortgage payment? You know, what are the banks going to do? Are they going to work with these individuals, or are they going to start foreclosing on people? And this could be a terrible negative. And hopefully, that doesn't happen. We don't want people getting foreclosed on. We don't want people losing their homes. But if the inevitable happens, if this is what is supposed to happen, if this ends up playing out as what happens, there's people out there who will be capitalizing on this opportunity of negative to make a positive. Now, when I say capitalize on this opportunity, they're capitalizing on the economy, whether they're going to buy foreclosures from the bank, whether they're going to take advantage to capitalize on the prices of real estate going down because of foreclosures that hit the market. So these opportunities where potential real estate may take a downturn in pricing, that's where we're talking about people capitalizing on this opportunity if there is a negative. So what I wanted to do is chat about flipping houses, because if that was to happen, if we were to take a negative downturn, that's beyond your control, my control. If all of a sudden we go back into a 2008 where there's tons of foreclosures and the market's saturated with properties, it's unfortunately something that we cannot stop if it happens. So what can we do though? Well, we can put ourselves in a position to utilize and take advantage of this opportunity where real estate may get to a more affordable price. Right now, Salt Lake, in an article that I read last year, I don't know where we're ranked this year, but ironically, last year, 2019, Salt Lake had made, for the first time in history, the top 25 most expensive markets in the nation. Right? We've never been in that top 25 list. Of course, New York City, San Francisco, these guys are at the top of the list all the time. Salt Lake City has never made this top 25 list of most unaffordable housing in America. Well, we just made number 25. Last year, 2019, we broke the list, and we were the 25th most unaffordable housing market in the nation. So, that's good and bad at the same time. Bad if you're trying to buy a house, because now, in the past, Salt Lake City was a place that was affordable, that you could typically buy a house with, in your 20s. Now, you're probably not going to be able to afford a house till your 30s. They say every market in the country has an average age where people become homeowners. And affordable markets tend to be younger aged people. So in Salt Lake City, as I mentioned, because we've always been so affordable, you could buy a house in your 20s. Take Los Angeles, for example. Los Angeles is so expensive. I think the average age before someone can finally afford to purchase a home, they're renters their whole lives until I think their 40s. I think Salt Lake now is probably, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm sure the statistic's out there somewhere, but we've become so unaffordable that probably most people in Salt Lake are going to be in their 30s now, no longer in their 20s. So that could be a bad thing in that it takes longer to become a homeowner in this market. The good thing, obviously, is as far as becoming an unaffordable market, is if you're on the other side of the fence as a landlord, other side of the fence meaning renter or landlord. That's why this opportunity of affordable housing could be so important for you if we go into some type of economical correction, because now, hopefully, as the market turns around, we go back out of that top 25 list for a minute or two, where that you can afford to purchase real estate, because if you're on the side of the fence as the landlord and the market's unaffordable, then that's good news for you, because that means most people can't afford a home, so they're going to be a tenant. I shouldn't say most people. That means a lot of people won't be able to afford a home, so you're going to have a big renters pool to be able to basically fill in your rental properties. And rental properties obviously can be very advantageous for you to pick up today or pick up during this next anticipated, predicted, whatever you want to call it, potential real estate correction that we might be facing here. If you can pick up some rental properties, then you definitely have a better opportunity of having a nicer retirement. You take these properties that you purchased today while we're still affordable, because really hypothetically, we broke the list at 25 of most unaffordable cities in the nation. But really, 25 means we're still somewhat affordable in just a hot market, right? And all the hot markets were the least expensive market, which is cool. We made the hot market list. So if we're in the hot market list, that means you're going to have a lot of people who can afford, or who are going to need a rental property. Everybody needs housing. Population growth here in Salt Lake and Salt Lake County, Utah County, Davis, Weber County specifically is growing massively. So if you can own some rental properties, you're setting yourself up for, a healthier retirement. Let's say you purchase a couple single-family homes or a duplex. In 30 years from today, when that loan is free and clear, and that's if you take the whole 30 years to pay it off. For some people, that's going to be the best case scenario. For other people, I know a lady spoke at the Salt Lake Real Estate Investing Association. She had picked up I believe she picked up 6 properties, and she did that in a 10-year span. She paid all 6 off. She basically paid more than the mortgage payment that was required every single month. So within 10 years, she purchased 6 properties and had them all paid off free and clear. So that rental income, and if you can imagine, each home is bringing in almost $2,000 a month. For the sake of simple math, let's call it $2,000 a month. 2 times 6 is $12,000 a month. Minus expenses and other things. That's a pretty healthy retirement with only 6 properties. Let's just say you did that with 3 properties, right? Got those paid off free and clear. Let's say you did that depending on your age. If you're young, take the 30 years, do whatever you choose, but maybe you want to do it quicker. Maybe you're a little bit older and you want to get this paid off sooner like this lady did. Then put a little bit more extra into the mortgage payment. You're going to have to do some calculations to determine how much extra you'd need to put in to have them free and clear by the time that you were hoping, your goal time. But let's just say you had 3 properties, all renting for $2,000 a month, all free and clear. That's $6,000 a month. Probably a healthier retirement having that $6,000 a month coming in when you're 60, 70, however old, versus not having those properties, right? So this potential economical correction that people are anticipating, predicting that might be coming, as I mentioned, even the acquisition lead guy for Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, in this interview is guesstimating that we are in for that downturn, and they've sold 3,000 of their 10,000 units to prep, to get ready, to have cash to purchase more higher performing, valuable assets, in this particular case, real estate. For those of you who don't know who Rich Dad Poor Dad, or you don't know the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, or Robert Kiyosaki is the author of this book, New York best-selling author. Highly recommend reading that book. It talks about getting involved in real estate. So what I wanted to do is, as I mentioned, talk about flipping, because there could potentially be an opportunity that is around the corner. And so I wanted to share with you guys today the different ways to look at a property. We're also going to obviously have our nightmare story that we're going to talk about. And so let's dive into this. I wanted to chat first about how to analyze a flip, right? And the reason why I chose to do a flip in this show today versus a rental, and we probably will do a rental property in the future. We've actually done both already in the past, just through interviews, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper today on a flip, is because a flipping house is a little less known. More people probably buy rental properties than flip properties, right? There's lots of people out there, whether you're a doctor or attorney or whatever, lots of people out there have rental properties, but not a lot of people flip houses. So I wanted to dive in that today. So let's start off with how to analyze a flip. Okay, the basics is you're going to work backwards from the value of what you can sell the property for when it's all fixed up. Okay, so let me say that again. It's just math. You're simply working backwards from the price of the home that you can sell it for when it's all fixed up. So let's just say you go out and you find a house today. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to have a really easy example. Your next door neighbor happens to pass away. Let's just say that now the heirs of the home, your next door neighbor, let's just say, was older, and the heirs of the home who've now inherited, they already have moved on. They have their own families, so they don't need the house anymore. So they're looking to sell it, and you happen to have a connection because you're the next door neighbor, and so you realize that your next door neighbor's house is very, very dated. But if you could remodel it, what would it sell for at that in that particular neighborhood? So you'd first pull comparables. You're going to pull comps of homes. Basically, comps is short for comparable homes. You're going to find comparable homes to that home, same square footage, same beds and bath, and you're going to compare that to homes that are already remodeled, right, in that particular area, to get an idea of what the houses in that neighborhood are selling for top dollar. So once you have that number, and we're going to keep math really easy here, we're going to use $100,000 for the sake of really easy math. Let's just say, and that's not practical in Salt Lake County, or Utah, or Davis, or Weber. But let's just, for the sake of hypothetical examples, we're going to use $100,000 to keep math easy. So let's just say that this house is all fixed up. You could sell for $100,000. Well, the first thing you're going to have to do is minus the expenses that you incur when you sell a home, right? This is any home, whether it's a flip home or just the home you live in. You're going to pay typically 6% to real estate agents, right? And you're typically going to pay 1% as a seller in closing costs, but oftentimes the buyers will ask for help, assistance in closing costs. And so let's just assume, I like to plan, when I plan out and I analyze, I plan for the worst. Let's just say that and I shouldn't say the worst, that sounds negative, but the worst case scenario is a buyer is going to ask you probably for 3% of closing costs. So let's just assume that a buyer is going to ask you for 3% of closing costs. You're going to have 1% of closing costs on your side, so that's 4% right there. And if you have to pay a real estate agent 6%, because they're going to pay 3% to the buyer's agent who comes and brings the buyer to buy your home, then you're looking at 10%, right? 6% in real estate agent costs and 4% in closing costs if you have to pay 3% of your buyer's closing costs. So I plan for that. If we don't have to pay for that, then great. If we don't have to pay for our buyer's closing costs because they don't ask for it, great. You just made an extra 3% in your profit. But if you plan for the worst, then you can be prepared for the worst. Okay, so right off the top, when you put your house on the market at that $100,000 price, you already know you're going to minus 10%. So in our example, that's $10,000 in expenses that everybody typically will pay in selling a home. Okay, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people will pay in selling a home. So now you minus 10%. The next thing you want to minus is the amount of repairs it's going to cost you to fix up the home. So if this house is super, super dated, what are you going to do to the home? Does it need a new roof? Does it need a new furnace? Does it need an air conditioner? Is it still a swamp cooler? Does it need a new water heater? Those are typically bigger ticket items. When you have the roof, furnace, AC unit, water heater, electrical, plumbing. If you have to upgrade, if the home is really old and it has knob and tube wiring, then you're going to need to upgrade a lot of electrical, and that can be very expensive as well. So those are going to be typically big items. So you're going to have to determine, what are you going to have to upgrade? Are you going to put new kitchen cabinets in because the ones that are very dated? So once you've figured out what your repair cost is, then you minus that expense. So you have $100,000 minus your cost to sell expense, which is 10%. We just discussed that. Minus, let's just say hypothetically in this example, it cost you $20,000 to remodel a home, which is, again, just an example. It's going to cost you probably more than $20,000 to do a full-blown remodel in any home in Salt Lake County. You could probably remodel part of a home for $20,000. Not probably, you could, part of a home. But to do a full-blown remodel anywhere in Salt Lake County, for example, it's going to be full-blown, more than $20,000. But in our example, we call it $20,000. So now from $100,000 minus the 10%, which is in this case $10,000, keeping math easy, we're down to $90,000. Now we minus the $20,000 it's going to cost us to fix up the home to make it to a high-priced home for that neighborhood. Now we minus that $20,000. 90 minus 20 is $70,000. So now we're at $70,000 just in expenses to remodel the home, right? Excuse me. Now we're in $30,000 in expenses to remodel the home, which leaves $70,000 left. So now you have to minus what you want to make. Now, the reason I say you want to make, there's a lot of people out there that will preach, oh, you want to make 10%, you want to make 20% profit on whatever you can sell it for. I think those are good rules of thumb when you're just starting. It keeps newer investors safe. You hear a lot of national speakers or gurus say you want to have a 10% profit margin, a 20% profit margin, which is a good rule of thumb if you're new and you maybe miscalculate what you can sell it for, you miscalculate your renovations, so you got a big cushion in there to hopefully come out of it ahead and not negative. But I had a mentor tell me a long, long time ago, depending on what I'm going to do to the home would depend on how much I want to make. If I'm doing a full-blown remodel, yes, I'm going to want to make a lot more than if all I'm going to do to the home is paint and carpet. Because there's a lot less risk on remodeling a home if you're not removing walls, if you're not digging up wiring, if you're not dealing with foundation, if you're not doing a lot of major construction. If all you're going to do is paint and carpet, then you can determine, well, maybe, hypothetically, maybe making $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 just to paint and new carpet a home might be worth the profit, right? But if you're going to go and remove walls and do an add-on or whatever, major construction, then you're going to want to have a much bigger cushion. So that's why I say minus what you want to make. So in this example, let's just say hypothetically, to do all the work, you're going to spend $20,000 in remodeling costs. Let's just say you want to make, in this example, $20,000 profit. So now your $70,000 minus what you want to make is $50,000, and I call it a profit cushion. Actually, I call it a cushion, really is what I call it, because you have a goal to make $20,000, but really that cushion is there to protect you so that you profit something, hopefully. In many cases, surprises pop up, unexpected cost will pop up, maybe the market changes. Right now, there's probably a lot of flippers who are playing in the high-end flipping game that are a little bit nervous. They might hold their properties longer. If they're holding their properties longer, they're having more holding costs. They got to pay the mortgage payment or hard money loan every single month longer than they expected, and those eat your profit margin, so that's a profit cushion. So you hope to make 20, but maybe due to some unexpected events, you make 18, you make 16. Whatever it is, it's your cushion. So in this particular case, let's call it 20,000. Then that means, in this particular example, you would ask $50,000. You would, I should say, offer $50,000 on the home, right? And that's basically the math. Now, obviously, you're going to have to adjust that accordingly to prices that are realistic in the Salt Lake, Utah, Davis, Weber County, because there are no homes that are $100,000. But we wanted to keep math easy, so we used math $100,000 as our example. So let's just do it really quickly. $300,000 house. Let's just say you can sell this home all fixed up, $300,000. You're going to minus 10% right off the top, which we talked about, real estate agent fees and closing costs. So at that particular point now, that's $30,000. So you're down to $270,000. Let's just say that it cost you $50,000 to fix up this house. So now from $270,000 minus $50,000, you're down to $220,000. And let's just say you want to make $40,000. Now you're at $180,000. So $180,000 is the price that you want to offer if you're paying cash. Okay, this is not taking in consideration that you're borrowing money, hard money. A lot of flippers out there borrow hard money, but there's also some flippers out there who pay cash. They don't want to have that extra expense. So if you're paying cash, then that's the formula. If you're going to borrow hard money, then you just need to minus a little bit more on the cost of what it's going to cost you to borrow that loan. Hard money lenders, or I shouldn't say hard money in general, I should just call it a loan. Whatever loan you're utilizing, private money, hard money, conventional, whatever it is, and you're doing a flip, you're just going to want to anticipate how long are you going to hold this property. Let's just say 6 months. How many months? How much is your loan payment per month? Times that by 6, and any costs on top of that, points that you might have added on top of that. Determine what it's going to cost you to borrow that loan for 6 months, and then of course you can minus that as well. So the example was strictly if you had the cash to go out and do this without borrowing any money. If you're going to borrow money, just factor that in there as well. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to take a quick commercial break. That is the formula. That is the basic, basically, that is the formula that I use. That is the formula that a lot of my friends use. That is the formula that a lot of flippers use. Basically, is you take your after repair value, ARV. You'll hear that acronym. ARV, after repair value. You take that number, which is the value after you repair the home. So in this case, we used $300,000 in our second example. You take that ARV minus 10%, minus your repairs, whatever that cost is, minus what you want to make, and that is your what they call MAO, M-A-O, maximum available offer, M-A-O, MAO. Okay, so when we come back, we are going to talk about, I had mentioned earlier, pulling comps to determine how much a house is that you can sell it for. Now, this is very important because if you determine this price wrong and you think it's higher than it actually is, then your formula is going to be way off and you might find yourself losing money on that particular transaction. So, don't go away. We're going to discuss that. We also have the nightmare story coming up. We're going to share a story about a property that was very challenging to sell on a flip, so that you can learn the lessons that I learned on this particular flip. Thank goodness it's over. But don't go away. With smartphones and technology making life a little easier, the Snap Leash has also been designed to make life a little easier for you and your pup. Whether you're out on a stroll in the park, or possibly a walk through the city, or maybe even a hike up in the mountains, the Snap Leash is the perfect leash for you. The Snap Leash can easily and conveniently convert into 7 types of leashes, making the Snap Leash the most convenient leash in the world. What other leash do you know that is 7 leashes in one? With the Snap Leash having appearances on the Today Show in New York City, TV 47 in Dallas, Texas, and ABC 4 on Midday, Utah. You are definitely going to want to take a peek at what the Snap Leash can do for you and your best friend. Make life a little easier for you and your pup and visit www.snapleash.com today. All right, guys, we are back. You're listening to K-Talk Radio, 1640 AM. This is the show, Utah Home Sweet Home. I am your host, Yoshi Shiraki. We are talking about flipping houses today. Wanted to basically plant some seeds in your guys' head about maybe getting some more education on the real estate market, simply because it's a very interesting time, and I'm not going to dive into it. Again, we discussed at the beginning of the show what kind of opportunities may potentially be in front of us in the near future. And so, if you've ever thought about investing in real estate, I highly recommend considering it now, because it could potentially be a very good time to get started and get involved. All right, so what we're going to talk about now is basically pulling comparable properties to determine the value of what you could sell a house for after you fixed it up. So typically, you're going to ask a real estate agent to pull comparables. We usually call them comps just because we're lazy. We don't want to say the whole word comparables, so we cut it in half and call it comps. So you're going to ask a real estate agent to pull comps on a particular home based off of other homes in that area that are very similar of that home, similar square footage, similar beds and baths, on what the highest remodeled homes in that particular area are selling for, to get an idea of what you could sell yours for if you made your home as nice as those homes. So typically, you don't want to go more than a half a mile away from the house. So when you pull comparables, you're not going to pull comparables, let's just say, in the whole city, in the whole county, because a house 2 miles away from that house could be a completely different neighborhood. It could be a brand new development, and those houses are going to sell for maybe way more than the house that you just purchased that you're going to fix and flip. So typically, you're going to stick to about a half a mile radius of that particular home. Now, these are very basics this is a very basic rule of thumb. I highly recommend you get to understand your market and the different streets, the invisible borders, I should say, within a market that can change the price of a home by $10,000, $15,000, literally from one house that's across the street from the other. Okay, we'll talk about that here in a second. But you're going to go within about a half a mile of the subject property. You're going to pull properties, and I've chatted with a handful of appraisers to get an idea of how big of a difference in square footage do they typically go. The closer the better. If you can find a house that's the same square footage as your house, then that's a great comparable. But I get the answer. 20% is a pretty safe number from the different appraisers that I've chatted with. So if the home, let's just say, is 1,000 square feet, to keep math easy again, 20% of that is 200 square feet. So they would look at properties 200 square feet bigger as well as 200 square feet smaller to basically compare other homes to the subject property. So it's from 800 square feet in this example up to 1,200 square feet. But I like to, I like to keep it as close as possible to the square footage. If you can find a home, let's say your subject property's 1,000 square feet, and you find one that's 1,050 or 975, to me, I just feel a little bit better knowing that that's a very close comparable. I don't have to really worry about the appraisal coming in under value. So as close to the property as possible is where my comfort level is. Everybody's a little bit different. You do have the flexibility, though, typically of about 20%. So square footage, very similar, within a half a mile, and you typically want to stay within the last 90 days of transactions, right? So when I pull comparables, I'm only going to go back 90 days of sales, typically, to find out what's the most recent data of what that neighborhood is selling for. So what sold yesterday, right, up to 90 days ago? What houses in this neighborhood that are in great condition, because the house I'm going to fix up is going to be in great condition, or what are these houses selling for within a half a mile in the last 90 days within a very similar square footage and beds and baths? Okay. And then you could also look at the land size. I mean, if there's a house that's, got acres of land, then that's going to change if you've only got 0.18 of an acre. So take a peek at the acreage of the land. I don't tend to worry too much if it's, similar square footage, if it's a subdevelopment where everyone has more or less the same yard. I don't really focus a ton on the acreage of the yard unless it's dramatically different. Okay, so then once you've compared these, once you've pulled these properties, all the properties that sold in the last 90 days within a half a mile that are similar in square footage, then you're basically going to click through all the pictures. Again, you're going to have your real estate agent pull this data for you and send it to you. Unless you're a real estate agent yourself, then you can do it yourself on the MLS. But if you're not a real estate agent, you're going to have your power team member, in this case, your real estate agent, send you this information. And you're just going to click through all of the properties, through all of the pictures of each property to get an idea of what the condition looks like inside. Now, here's the easy thing. When you go to flip a house and you're wondering, what should I do to this remodel? Well, your answers are in those pictures. You don't need to do anything different to get any more money necessarily. Basically, if you duplicate what those houses look like, then you'll get the price of what those houses got, if that makes sense. So that is basically a really cut and dry basic formula of how you're going to determine what you can sell your house for once you fix it up. Again, you're going to want to to know your city because there are invisible lines within your city. So I'm going to give you an example. We talked about how we would talk about this later. So now's the time. Example of an invisible line is State Street, right? Houses on the east side of State Street versus across the street on State Street are going to typically be $5,000 to $10,000 higher in value. Typically, not always, but because of the invisible line right there on State Street separating east to west, oftentimes there is a price change. Another price change, a big one would be 7th East. Houses west, so from State Street to 7th East, you're going to be able to find values of homes that are very similar. But once you cross the street and go east on 7th East, from about 7th East to 9th East, there's going to be another price point. And then from 9th to 11th, and maybe some people would argue 13th, but give or take, there's another invisible line, right? And then Highland Drive, there's another invisible line. And then let's say you go all the way up to Wasatch Boulevard. Houses east of Wasatch, up in, let's say, Canyon Cove, Olympus Cove, Top of the World, depending on where you are in Salt Lake County. Those houses are going to be more expensive than the houses west of Wasatch Boulevard. So there's all these invisible lines. Happens again on, if you're going north to south, 2100 South. Houses change in price from 2100 South. I mean, these are subtle changes of about $5,000 to $10,000, but that makes a big difference in your analysis. If you're pulling data from the wrong side of the invisible line, you could find yourself in trouble. Other invisible lines that you'll see in different markets could be freeways. You know, freeways oftentimes separate one neighborhood from another neighborhood. In different parts of the country, that could be a huge change. There could be, you know, a really expensive neighborhood on one side of a freeway, and then a significantly less expensive neighborhood on the other side of the freeway. Kind of an example is 215 going east to west. From east to west. So on the north side of 215, you have the Walker Lane Holiday, you know, these major mansions that are millions of dollars. But on the south side of 215, just that freeway, that's the only thing separating. You have, you know, less expensive real estate. It's still pretty expensive there as well, but significantly less than the north side where you have, you know, those major mansions in Holiday. So rivers are also another invisible line. Wherever there's a river, sometimes separates the difference between two different neighborhoods. And railroad tracks can oftentimes be an invisible line that sets two neighborhoods apart in value. So you need to know these things when you're pulling your comparables. So the basics are what I shared earlier, but you're going to need to dive into it a little bit better. My recommendation is, you know, you can live in a certain city all your life, and if you're not involved in real estate, you have no idea there's these invisible lines that create value differences from one side of the other. I would sit down with the real estate agent who's very familiar with that market, who understands where these invisible lines are. You know, not every real estate agent's going to understand these invisible lines, because let's just say a newer real estate agent who just gets their license today may not have any knowledge of these invisible lines, just like a lot of you who are probably listening, unless you got your license and started working this industry. Up until that point, you might not know where these invisible lines are either. And so I would find a seasoned real estate agent who's very familiar with these different value changes in streets per street, if that makes sense. Okay, we're going to take another commercial break, but when we come back, I'm going to share with you a nightmare story that was one of my flips and the lessons that I learned from it, because the house itself was beautiful. Where I ran into the nightmare was the next door neighbor. There's not a lot you can do to your next door neighbor, basically to the next door neighbor house. There's not a lot you can do. You can spend all the money that you need to spend to make your house shine, but you don't have a lot of control of your neighbors. And so I'm going to share with you a nightmare story on what happened and the lesson that I learned, in case you find yourself ever in that situation. Hi, I'm Yoshi Shiraki, the author of the book, My Body's Just For Me. The book written for children, to educate children on the prevention of child abuse. With the assistance of New York best-selling author Richard Paul Evans, we were able to publish this book as a tool to help break the ice in an easy and innocent way to help children understand and learn how to speak up and communicate. I have been invited numerous times onto Good Things Utah to discuss the importance of good communication with your child in regards to abuse, and also to discuss how the book, My Body's Just For Me, is a great tool for every parent when having that tricky conversation with their children. For more information on the book, My Body's Just For Me, please visit www.protectourangels.com today. And remember, the more we focus on prevention, the less we'll have to focus on rehabilitation. All right, guys, we are back. This is K-Talk Radio, 1640 AM. You are listening to the show, Utah Home Sweet Home. I am your host, Yoshi Shiraki. Today, we're discussing flipping houses, and it's time for the Nightmare Story Time and the lesson that can be learned. You know, whenever I have a guest, if you've ever listened to any of the previous shows, we have the Nightmare Story segment. And the reason we have the Nightmare Story segment is because it's better to learn from somebody else's mistakes than our own. And if you've been in real estate long enough, if you've been fixing and flipping houses, buying rental properties long enough, you will have your own nightmare story. And all the guests that I've had on my show are seasoned investors, and so they all have multiple nightmare stories, as do I. And the reason I like asking the nightmare story, obviously, is because if I can learn a lesson from somebody else's mistake, then hopefully that will prevent me from making that mistake in the future. So I'm going to start off by talking about this particular home that we ended up having a pretty good nightmare on. Thankfully, just to get this out right away, thankfully we still were profitable, but not that much. I'll get to that at the end of the story. So I found this particular property one day. I had gone to look at a particular home, checking up on a renovation project, and was driving through the neighborhood basically to go home or go back to the office. And while I was driving out of the neighborhood, I happened to see a vacant property. Now, this is a great way to find good opportunities. For those of you who are asking, yeah, you see these people on the show flipping houses, but how do you find these deals? Well, it's a great question. One way is finding vacant properties. So you can tell they're vacant because either the lawn's overgrown or there might be multiple newspapers on the driveway that no one's picked up, or if it's the winter time, the snow hasn't been shoveled, or there's a couple boards on the windows. You know, somebody owns the home and someone threw a rock through the window and they don't want to fix it because nobody's living there, so they just put a board on the window. There's all sorts of indicators that a home is vacant. And in this particular one, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there were a couple notices on the door from the county, and there was a board on one of the windows. And I believe the property had, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while, the notices were, basically informing them of a fine due to the yard and all of that good stuff. So I pulled over the property as I was driving out, wrote down the address, and thought, oh, here's a vacant property. I'm going to research who owns this and reach out to them to see if they want to sell it, because they obviously aren't using it. It's sitting there vacant. Now, properties can be vacant for different reasons. One, maybe it's a second home. Maybe the owner lives in California and they have a home here in Utah for the winter to come ski. Those could be vacant, but they're probably going to be in decent condition. They're probably not going to have a board on the window and notices on the front door and all that good stuff. This one was not that case at all. So what I did is basically wrote down the address, and what you can do is you go home or to your office, to your computer, and you go to the county's assessor's website, right? So this house was in Salt Lake County. So if you don't know what that website is, Google Salt Lake County Assessor's website or Utah County's assessor website. Whatever county you're in, Google the assessor website, that county and the assessor's website. Then there's a place in there that you could do a property search for an address, and that's exactly what I did. I typed in the address and I hit search, and then what it does is it tells you who owns the home. Right? And so now you know who owns it. It doesn't give you a phone number, though. So you can't call them. But what it does is it does give you a mailing address of the individual who owns the home. So basically from there, I started mailing the individual a letter asking if they wanted to sell the property. And they ended up, I think it was the second letter. I sent like 2 letters over, I think I sent one a quarter. So every 3 months I had sent them a letter. So by the second letter, they actually were very interested in selling it. They just didn't get around to doing it the first time when I sent them the first letter. And they called me back and they communicated with me. Yeah, we've got that home. It's sat there vacant forever. It was actually another real estate investor who owned the home. And he says, yeah, I'm definitely not interested in having it anymore. I thought I'd fix it up one day, but I never did. And so, yes, you can have the house. So basically, purchased the home from that individual and was super excited. But here was the catch. He did not have a key to the house. He purchased this home, I think through an auction, never got a key. The doors, he says, you're going to have to look through the windows to see what you can see. The door is locked, and I prefer you don't kick down the door because then I won't be able to close the door back. So if you buy it, you're going to have to buy it sight unseen. So we did our calculations. We put in, a little safety net, because I buy a lot of houses sight unseen, believe it or not. And it didn't take long to learn that I need to put in a little bit of a safety net, a little extra cushion, or say, in my profit margin when I am buying a house sight unseen. Because you obviously can't see a lot when you don't get to see the house. When you don't go inside, you're there's a lot of risk into what you could potentially be finding yourself getting involved in. So basically, I always typically will tell the sellers, listen, I might be able to pay you significantly more for the home if you let me go inside and take a peek at what I'm buying. But if you don't, then I have to cover my risk, and I'm going to have to offer you a little bit less because I need to, basically have a safety net. And I give the sellers the option. You can let me in and let me see what the house looks like, and if it's in better condition, then I can give you a better offer. If not, this is what my offer is. This is my sight unseen offer. Of course, I have no idea what my seen offer is until I see it. But if you want something better than the sight unseen offer, let's see if we can get in. In this particular case, the seller's like, well, you can't. There's just no way to get in. I have no keys. I can't let you in even if I wanted to. We'd have to break in or call a locksmith. I don't want to pay for all that stuff. So I was like, okay. I offered to pay for the locksmith, and I don't remember exactly what happened, but I ended up buying it sight unseen. The sight unseen price was good enough for the individual. So purchased the home, and actually I was pleasantly surprised when I finally got in. Here's the first hiccup that we ran into, though. Got to the house, got there with my contractor. The day we closed, it was now my home, and I was with my contractor, and I said, all right, well, we had gone to Home Depot. We went actually and measured the front door, went to Home Depot, bought another front door, because we were planning on kicking this door down, and it was probably going to break, and so we were ready to put in a new front door. And the current front door was battered up anyway, and so we wanted to put a new one anyway. So we're sitting at the front door, and we're talking, all right, who's going to kick it in, you or me? And we're laughing because, we were telling jokes, like having a bet, like if he could even kick the front door in. And then right then, the front door opens, and we both we're standing on the front porch, and the front door opens. We're like, holy cow. Well, there were two squatters inside sleeping. It was wintertime. And they heard us talking about kicking the front door in. So before they kicked it in, they hurried and just opened it, right? And so they basically apologized. They said, oh, are you guys the owners? And we're like, yeah, we're the owners. They're like, we're so sorry. We're just trying to stay warm. Can we, take our stuff? And I'd not even been in the house yet. And I was like, guys, you can take whatever you want. The front door's open. I can see a sofa. I can see just a bunch of garbage. I was like, you can take all your stuff. You can take all the stuff in the home if you want. Of course, they didn't. I wish they would have. But they took what they needed, and then we got in. So there was the first nightmare. The second was the next door neighbors were drug dealers. So we had a lot of riffraff that would come to the house every single day buying product, right? Buying drugs. And then the third nightmare is once the house is all done being remodeled, the house was beautiful and it showed beautifully. And we went under contract immediately, which was great. However, the person who went under contract with us started to do their due diligence, and while they were at the home, they noticed that the next door neighbor were drug dealers and the riffraff that was coming. And they canceled the contract. Well, here's where the nightmare really kicked in. We went under contract 6 times on that house. 6 times. And here's what saved us. The next door neighbors ended up getting foreclosed on. The bank evicted the drug dealers out of the next door neighbor's home, and that house became vacant. When that house became vacant, our 6th buyer who locked it under contract ended up closing and buying the house, right? And so When that sixth buyer purchased the home, that was massive relief, but we were projected to make $30,000 on that flip. Because of the price reductions we kept having to make due to the next door neighbor, we only made $6,000. Now, when the house next door became vacant due to the eviction, due to the bank foreclosing on those people, it would have been great to raise the price back up, but by that point, people had already seen the property get locked up 5 previous times. And so at that particular point, we just left the price to where it was, had that sixth buyer come in, offer full price, and at that particular point, we closed on it. Had the bank not foreclosed on our next door neighbors, then I still may own that home today and it might be a rental property. So the lesson that I learned is you cannot do due diligence just on the house itself that you're buying. You may need to do a little extra due diligence on the neighboring homes itself. And a lot of times I will look at the numbers of a home and determine if it mathematically makes sense. And in this case, it did. There was a $30,000 profit. But I didn't do the due diligence on the next door neighbor, which I do today. That was the lesson I learned, and I do that now. Every time I buy a house, I figure out who are the immediate neighbors and could that hurt my resale transaction. All right, guys, we're at the end of the show. If you've missed any part of this, definitely check out our website at utahhomesweethome.com. You can click on the social media links. These are all filmed and recorded. You can watch the entire show later. And I hope you guys all stay safe and healthy and enjoy the rest of the day.
You're listening to K-Talk Radio, KBJA 1640 AM, Sandy, Salt Lake City, and all across the Wasatch Front. Bringing you live, local two-way talk.
The following call is